So after all that work, putting that seat cover on, I realized that I didn't have the installation kit that you're supposed to have to put the burlap down and then put the felt around the corners of the lower seat frame. So I'm just going to leave it just the way it is. I'm not going to install the second one until I get that kit, because there's really no point in doing it. But the reason for the burlap is so the foam, when you're sitting on the pad, the foam doesn't squish and start chewing into the seat springs, which disintegrates the foam, which rains a bunch of foam down on your carpet, so on and so forth. So, you know, I don't mind showing mistakes, because that's really just the whole, it's real. It's a real thing, and you're going to come in contact with it if you're doing anything like what we're doing here. And it's just the reality of things, especially when you're a newbie on a particular car brand that you're not that familiar with. It's just part of the learning process, really. So another thing I'm correcting is that the bolt in a previous segment I welded into the seat bracket for the stud that goes through the floor pan to hold the seat brackets down to the pan. Well, the bolt I welded in there, I'm thinking, wow, why does it have to be so long? Well, it's supposed to be as long as the other ones, and it's literally, it was like a 1/4 inch away from being able to put a nut on there. And so anyway, another learning experience. So I've found the right bolt. Now it's not the OEM stud that I'm not going to go to do that. This is just fine. So I found another bolt. It's a grade 8 bolt. We shaved the head down to mimic what the other one looks like, but I'm trying to mimic this, and now you can see how they're both about the same height. So I just need to tack this guy and then TIG weld, finish it. I'm using TIG because it'll have less impact of being able to put this flat on the sheet, on the floor pan. So if I were to MIG this, it would just build up too much weld, and then that's really not what we're looking for. So if I TIG it, I can really almost do like a fusion weld, meaning burning the metal, basically the bolt to the metal frame itself, with very little input from a filler rod. So, but yeah, correcting another mistake, and then of course I have to paint this thing after this, and yeah, so 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That's really the name of the game here. So anyway, let me get to this. Yeah, if you see me holding my cup or my torch over the weld after I stop the arc, that's a practice that I choose to stay with, because of welding aluminum and stuff like that. It's really important that you keep that argon or shielding gas over the puddle of molten metal until it dries. That basically allows it to dry without contaminants in it. And it's all about preventing contamination, especially with aluminums and non-ferrous metals. Bumper going on. Bumperettes are next. But yeah, looking good, looking good. These bumpers are OER bumpers, and they're actually really nice. We still have to remove this guy, of course, because you don't have to do it just once. You have to do it twice at least. So it's a little out of alignment. It needs to shift to the passenger side slightly, and then we have to bend the bumperettes down a little bit because they're a little bit tight, and obviously have to pull the bumper back off, put the bumperettes on, and the license plate light fixture. But happy to see bumpers on this thing finally. Yeah, but they are nice. The OER stuff is, they say show quality, and it is show quality stuff, so highly recommend it. Hey guys, so I'm gonna take a break from the seats. I ordered the seat installation kit. Don't make the same mistake that I did. I was so excited to get those seat covers, I just totally forgot the install kit. And Legendary Interiors has a nice YouTube video on how to install their products, so go check those guys out. It's really a great tutorial. Don't do what I did and jump ahead, because you're just gonna have to redo it. But the good thing about redoing upholstery is that, yes, you can cut the hog rings off and just start over, but once you stretch those covers, it's really easy to redo it. So that's the upside, silver lining to this whole cloud of darkness. So anyway, being dramatic, whatever. So onto the puke tank system for the engine. So as I've mentioned in the past, if you use like just a traditional breather filter on your valve covers, they do mist, especially when the engine's under load or higher RPMs. They start misting out of those filters just due to the pressure in the crankcase. Totally fine, and if you don't mind having that mist all over your engine compartment, more power to you. That's great. I'm glad you can get past that, because I can't. I'm just the guy that always gets it on the headers and it starts to smoke and I think I'm on fire. So thus the puke tank was created. So it's actually there's a little more to it than meets the eye. It's not just a tank where stray oil goes. It actually does help prevent condensation getting inside your engine oil. Engine oil, you know, once you get condensation in there from short trips or short runs, it develops condensation because the hot air meets the cold air. You guys have heard me talk about that in depth in previous videos, but I'm going to put this system together, which requires me to make up some AN lines. So as you can see, I have my puke tank there, and as you notice, it's quite a bit below the valve covers, and I like to keep my puke tank lower than the valve cover height, because when you run these lines, they obviously have to come out of the fittings, and you want a downhill angle to the puke tank, so that condensation will actually run into the tank instead of back into the engine. And so that does create another maintenance point. So every oil change, I typically will take the tank out and I'll flush it out, and then I'll flush the lines also, because it just becomes water and chocolate milk, basically, like a blown hat gasket or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and take the first fitting off. I'm going to start with the longest one, so this guy will be our longest line, and I want to run them along the firewall as tight as possible, and I'm going to go into the 90 closest to the firewall over there. I thought about going into this 180, but I think I'm going to go into the 90, so that'll be just one line from here to the 90, and then this guy will actually come out and wrap around and go into that 180 right there. So that's the way I'm envisioning this happening. But as you know, things change. So we'll pull this guy off here, and we'll start making our line. These are dash 12 fittings in the valve covers, and then there's obviously a fill there. But this one doesn't have a fill, it just has the dash 12 on it. So I know you guys have probably seen an AN fitting get built before, but I'm going to show you again anyway. Set you guys up here. So I chose Red Horse manufacturer fittings, and in my experience, you always want to use the same fitting manufacturer as the hose you're using, because there are variances between different manufacturers for some reason. I mean, a dash 12 is going to be a dash 12 across the board, whether it's Red Horse, Earls, or whatever you can think of as far as brands go. But I have noticed that the tapers on these guys do tend to differ quite a bit. And these are swivel fittings, so they have the ability to swivel, which is a nice touch. So you got the collar here, and essentially AN fittings, your hose actually comes onto this taper here, and then it gets this fitting goes on the hose, and then as you screw this guy on, it forces this tip inside of the hose itself, and then the collar actually has teeth or threads in here that you actually thread this on to the hose before you connect the two. So it's pretty straightforward, but there's a little bit of a technique to it, which I will demonstrate. But so far I'm really impressed with the Red Horse stuff. I've never used their products until this project. So luckily my Allen wrench is the right size, so that'll accommodate that. I did get this crescent wrench out just in case. So let's get this line pulled out. Yeah, I've never seen a manufacturer that goes to the trouble of putting these caps on the end of their lines. It's pretty neat. And it's reasonable too. This stuff is very reasonably priced. So this actually has steel braid inside of it, as you can see, the shiny parts there. So this is not PTFE line. I didn't think it was necessary for this application. I normally would, but I didn't in this case. Now some of these, so you want to install the nut on the hose first, and some of them go on their reverse thread so that you back them on basically, and that seems to be the case with this guy. And you want to run it just basically up to the edge inside the threads here. Want it even all the way around. So you don't want to jam it into the threads here, because that'll cause a disruption. So what I have here is a little bit of motorcycle transmission oil. It really doesn't matter. You can use just regular engine oil for this. But you want to just get the end of your Allen fitting just lubed up just enough to get in, so as soon as you feel it snap into the edge of the hose there, you can back off the threads until they fall in, so you're not risking cross threading. There we go. Did you hear that click? Now I can run this in by hand. And what I'm doing is I'm washing the braid here in what's the word? I'm watching the braid as opposed to the edge of this collar here, and making, because sometimes when you're threading these in, they will jack the nut up and it'll basically pull it off of the hose. So you want to be careful of that. Once you get to a certain point, it starts entering the pointed tip starts entering enough into the hose where it grabs it and it won't let the nut jack up. So you want to avoid that, but just keep an eye on the nut in relation to the hose while you're doing this, because it will lift up slightly, but it'll reach a point where it stops. Now this isn't a high pressure application, so don't think I'm making a mistake by doing this, because yes, it could be, but I would, if this was a high pressure application, I would use a crimp style fitting instead of a traditional Allen size or style. So it lifts just a slight amount, but now it's stopped. You want to make sure it's going on straight, because sometimes it'll pitch this nut a little bit to the side. And so we reach a point now to where it's getting a little tight, so I'm going to put my soft jaws in my vise. So I'm just going to put the nut just above the level of the top of the surface of the soft jaws. Just give it a snug there so it doesn't move. And the reason you want to use Allen wrenches or this kind of an adjustable Allen wrench is because these won't scratch the anodizing off the fitting itself. A lot of guys don't care, but I always try to do the best job I can do within reason. I mean, eventually they get scratched up just from taking them on and off. But so now you can tell it's really binding in there. Maybe binding's the wrong word, but you can tell it's actually gaining traction. And that's why you're using that lubrication. Now it's not totally necessary, but for my OCD, I like to have the clamping surface in line with the clamping surface on the nut. It's not always possible, but I do like to do that just so it looks better. And there you have it. Now this is a 120 degree fitting, and I find that this is a very good use for valve covers because they're at, I believe, like a 45, so this makes them come off straight. So that's a fun little cheat there. Well, let's put this on the car and measure our length.